Leah Whitmore's pencil moved with a quiet rhythm, the graphite whispering across the page as if it knew the secrets she never spoke aloud. The late morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Maple Ridge Middle School, laying gold bars across the scarred surface of her desk. Outside, a lawnmower droned faintly, the hum almost blending with the muffled chatter from the hallway. She had finished her math assignment minutes ago, and now sketched without thinking, shapes and lines that slowly became a phoenix rising from flames, the wings stretching defiantly toward the top of the paper. For Leah, drawing wasn't just a pastime, it was a shield. Across the room, Chloe Bennett shot her a knowing glance. Chloe had warned her more than once that Mrs. Hargrave seemed to have it out for her. "She watches you different," Chloe had whispered last week when Leah was erasing a pencil smudge. "Like she's waiting for something." Leah had shrugged it off, not wanting to believe her friend's uneasy observation. But today, that gaze burned hotter than ever. Mrs. Susan Hargrave stood at the front of the room, tapping a capped marker against her palm. At 47, she had the posture of someone still living in an old grudge. Her pale hair was drawn back so tightly that it seemed to stretch the corners of her mouth into a permanent scowl. Leah felt that stare land on her, and before she could close her sketchbook, Hargrave's heels began their sharp staccato down the aisle. "That doesn't look like mathematics to me, Miss Whitmore," she said, her voice carrying just enough to make the other students fall silent. She plucked the sketchbook from Leah's desk with a quick, practiced motion and began flipping through the pages. Eagles in mid-flight, portraits of classmates, intricate patterns of flowers, all there in careful pencil strokes. "This," Hargrave announced, "is why your attention is scattered. Too busy playing artist to focus on real subjects." Leah's cheeks burned. She kept her eyes fixed on the desk, willing her heart to slow. Her grades were solid, above solid, in fact, but there was no point saying so. Hargrave's tone had that unmistakable edge, the kind that told Leah this wasn't about grades at all. The intercom crackled to life, and Principal Robert Hale's steady voice filled the room. "Attention, students and faculty. Our updated appearance policy takes effect immediately. All students are expected to comply with the revised standards. Please review your handbooks for details." The static faded, but the shift in Hargrave's expression was unmistakable, a thin, cold smile curving her lips. "Well, isn't that timely?" she said, placing the sketchbook back on Leah's desk as though it were something distasteful. "Stand up, Miss Whitmore." The room felt suddenly smaller as Leah rose, the eyes of 23 classmates following her. Chloe sat rigid at her desk, her pencil unmoving above her paper. "Front of the class, please," Hargrave directed, gesturing toward the whiteboard. She circled Leah slowly, like a hawk sizing up its prey. "Class," she began, "this is a clear example of a dress code violation. These braids," she gestured to Leah's carefully styled hair, "are excessive and distracting. The handbook clearly states hair must be neat and conservative." Leah swallowed hard. "Mrs. Hargrave, I have a medical condition. My mom filed—" "Speak up!" Hargrave cut in, her voice snapping like a whip. Leah tried again, louder. "I have alopecia. My mother filed paperwork with the school. Principal Hale approved—" "Creative," Hargrave interrupted, her eyes narrowing. "Some students think they deserve special treatment. Rules apply to everyone equally." Her gaze swept the room as though inviting agreement. No one spoke. Even the class clown kept his head down. "You have two choices," Hargrave said, stepping closer. "Remove those extensions now or go home for violating policy." Leah felt her throat tighten. "Please, I can't. My scalp—" "Your mother isn't here to make excuses for you," Hargrave snapped, her hand closing around Leah's arm. "We'll handle this in the nurse's office." A ripple of discomfort passed through the room, but no one moved. Chloe's eyes darted to her backpack. In one smooth motion, she slid her phone into her palm and tapped the record button, her face carefully neutral. The hallway outside smelled faintly of floor wax and cafeteria pizza. Hargrave's grip was firm, her steps brisk. Leah kept her gaze on the tiles, counting them under her breath. The lockers they passed were dented from years of slamming doors, their combination locks clattering with the occasional vibration from a passing class change. As they neared the nurse's office, Leah caught her reflection in a trophy case, her braids neat and even, hiding the bare spots that had been her reality for years. She thought of the Saturday morning she'd spent with her mother Danielle, carefully weaving them in while talking about everything and nothing. That memory flickered like a candle against the growing dread in her chest. Inside the nurse's office, the smell of antiseptic hit her immediately. Cabinets labeled first aid and student health records lined one wall. Nurse Linda Carter looked up from her computer, her brow furrowing at the sight of Leah's tear-bright eyes. "Mrs. Hargrave?" she began, but Hargrave's voice rolled over hers. "This student is in clear violation of the new dress code. She claims to have a medical condition, but I've checked. Nothing in her file about hair accommodations." Leah opened her mouth to speak, but the words tangled in her throat. The buzz of the fluorescent lights seemed suddenly too loud. Linda's gaze moved between them, uncertainty flickering there. But Hargrave's presence was commanding, the kind that left little room for dissent. It was in that moment Leah realized this wasn't about a rule in a handbook. It was about something Hargrave had decided long before she walked to Leah's desk. And as the nurse's hand hesitated over a drawer, Leah's pulse quickened with a quiet, desperate thought. "Mom, I need you." The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Mrs. Hargrave marched Leah into the small nurse's office. The cool air smelled faintly of antiseptic and lemon-scented cleaner, a sharp contrast to the warm hallway where the muffled noise of lockers and student chatter had followed them. Now, behind the closed door, it was quiet except for the faint ticking of a wall clock and the sound of Hargrave's heels clicking against the linoleum. Nurse Linda Carter glanced up from her computer, her reading glasses sliding slightly down her nose. At 55, she had the kind of calm presence that usually soothed nervous kids, a calm that now faltered as she took in Leah's tear-bright eyes and the teacher's tight grip on her arm. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice cautious, like someone testing the ice on a frozen pond. "This student is in clear violation of the new dress code," Hargrave said crisply, releasing Leah's arm only to fold her own across her chest. "These elaborate braids are excessive and distracting. She claims to have a medical condition, but I've already checked her file. Nothing about hair accommodations." Leah's voice trembled as she tried to speak. "Mrs. Carter, I have alopecia. My mom filed—" Hargrave's voice cut her off like a slammed door. "That's creative. I'm sure you'll say anything to avoid following rules. This isn't about excuses, it's about compliance." Linda frowned, standing and moving toward the filing cabinet labeled Student Health Records. "If she has a documented condition, we need to verify before taking any action." She pulled open the top drawer, the metal handle clinking softly. "No need," Hargrave said quickly, stepping between the nurse and the cabinet. "As I said, I already looked. Nothing there." Her tone carried the kind of authority that dared anyone to question her. Leah's hands clenched at her sides. The knot in her stomach tightened with every word. She could see the hesitation in Linda's eyes, the way her hand lingered on the cabinet handle before she let it drop. "Perhaps we should call her father," Linda offered, her voice tentative. "Her mother's overseas," Hargrave replied smoothly, "and her father is probably at work. We're authorized to enforce dress code policy immediately." She turned toward the counter. "Do you have clippers? These extensions need to come out." The room seemed to shrink. Leah's heart pounded in her ears. "Please," she whispered, "you don't understand what this will do to me. My hair—" "This is for your own good," Hargrave said, her tone syrupy with false concern. "No special treatment. No exceptions." Linda hesitated for a long moment before opening a drawer and pulling out a small case. She plugged the cord into the wall, the sharp buzz of the clippers filling the air like an angry insect. Leah flinched at the sound, pressing back against the chair as Hargrave guided her toward it. The nurse's hand shook slightly as she offered the clippers to Hargrave. Maybe we should— It's fine, Hargrave interrupted, taking the tool and positioning herself behind Leah. She pushed the girl's head gently forward. Let's get this over with. The first pass of the clippers sent a soft thunk of braided hair to the floor. Leah's chest tightened, her vision blurring. Each section that fell felt like a piece of herself being stripped away. She stared straight ahead at the wall, at the faded poster of hand-washing steps taped beside the sink, and tried to think of anything else. Linda shifted uncomfortably. That's enough, Susan. The extensions are off. No, Hargrave said, her voice firm. We have to ensure complete compliance. She moved the buzzing clippers over Leah's head again, and the soft swish of hair hitting the tile seemed louder than anything Leah had ever heard. Leah's scalp prickled in the cool air, every bump and hollow exposed. She wanted to disappear, to sink into the floor and never come back up. Finally, Hargrave clicked off the clippers and set them on the counter. There, she said with satisfaction. Full compliance. Wasn't so difficult, was it? Leah couldn't speak. Her hands trembled as she reached up, fingertips brushing the uneven stubble. The air stung her skin where the braids had been. I'll give you a few minutes, Hargrave said, as though she'd just administered a routine bandage instead of cutting away a child's dignity. She walked out, the door closing with a soft snick. For a long moment, Linda stood frozen, her face pale. I'm so sorry, she murmured, her voice breaking. I should have— She stopped, shaking her head. I didn't realize. I should have realized. Leah's voice was so small, it barely reached the nurse. I want my mom. Michael Whitmore paced the living room, the familiar creak in the floorboards beneath his boots marking each turn. In his hand, his phone felt heavier with every unanswered call. For the third time that evening, he left a voicemail on the secure military line. Danielle, call me as soon as you get this. It's about Leah. Something happened at school today. It's bad. His voice cracked on the last word, and he ended the call before it could betray more than he wanted. The house was quiet, except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the clock over the mantel. Outside, the sun had dipped behind the neighbors' maple trees, the porch light casting a warm circle on the steps. It should have been an ordinary evening, dinner cooking, Leah telling him about her day, maybe a movie before bed. Instead, the air felt thick, like a storm was sitting just outside the door. Upstairs, Leah hadn't spoken since he'd picked her up from school. She'd simply handed him Chloe's hoodie to keep over her head and climbed into the passenger seat without a word. He'd tried for small talk, asked if she was hungry, if she wanted to stop for ice cream, but each question had been met with silence. He glanced toward the staircase now, debating whether to try again. Instead, he busied himself in the kitchen, pulling a pot from the cabinet and filling it with water for her favorite pasta. He set the pot on the stove, turned the burner, and leaned against the counter, staring at nothing. That's when he noticed it. An envelope, plain white, slipped halfway under the front door. He crossed the room, bent down, and picked it up. His name wasn't on it. Inside, a single sheet of lined paper bore a hastily written message. Check the nurses' files. They know what happened. The complaint was filed 2 weeks ago. No signature, just the faint smell of pencil lead and something like hand lotion. Michael read it twice, the words etching themselves into his mind. If it was true, then Leah had reported trouble before today, and the school had done nothing. His jaw tightened. He reached for his phone again and scrolled to a name he hadn't called in years. Frank Carter. Frank was the night janitor at Maple Ridge now, but Michael knew him from another life, Afghanistan, 2009. Frank answered on the third ring, his voice carrying a note of guarded curiosity. Mike? Been a while. Frank, I need your help, Michael said, skipping the small talk. It's about my daughter. There was a pause on the line. I heard something happened. My wife mentioned it. She's the school nurse. Michael closed his eyes briefly. Then you know why I can't let this go. Another pause, heavier this time. You're talking about going in tonight, aren't you? I need to see her file. I need proof. Frank let out a low sigh. You know what this could cost me? Michael's voice softened, but the steel was still there. A 12-year-old girl was humiliated today, Frank. Your wife was caught in the middle. We both know this isn't going to stop unless someone stands up. Silence stretched on the line before Frank finally spoke. Maintenance entrance, east side, 20 minutes, bring a camera. 25 minutes later, Michael pulled his truck into the dimly lit lot behind the school. The sodium lights overhead cast everything in a pale orange glow. Frank was waiting by the door, keys in hand, a dark ball cap pulled low over his brow. They moved quickly through the empty hallways, their footsteps echoing off the lockers. The faint smell of industrial cleaner lingered in the air. Frank led the way to the nurse's office, his flashlight cutting a narrow path through the dark. Medical files are in that cabinet, he whispered, nodding toward a tall metal unit in the corner. Alphabetical order. Michael scanned the labels until his eyes landed on Whitmore. Leah. Grade 7. He pulled the manila folder free and opened it, his phone ready. The first pages were routine. Vaccinations, emergency contacts, physical exam results. But then he found it, a formal complaint form dated exactly 14 days ago. In Leah's neat handwriting, she makes comments about my hair being distracting, calls it urban, like it's bad, said my braids make me look like I'm trying too hard to be different. At the bottom, in red ink, discussed with student. No action required. Student counseled about appropriate appearance. Signed, Principal Robert Hale. Michael's throat went dry. He photographed the page, then kept going. Behind it were medical exemption forms Danielle had filed 6 months earlier, pages detailing Leah's alopecia, psychological assessments explaining the importance of protective hairstyles, and explicit requests for accommodation. Every single one bore Hale's signature of approval. He took pictures of everything, each click of the phone's camera sounding too loud in the stillness. When he was done, he slid the folder back into place. Find what you needed? Frank asked quietly. More than I wanted, Michael replied. His voice was low, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. They were almost to the door when Frank stopped and reached into his pocket. Here, he said, handing Michael a small flash drive. Hallway security footage. Shows her dragging Leah to the nurse's office. They already wiped the inside camera. Michael stared at the drive, then at his friend. Why are you helping me? Frank shrugged. Because I've got a granddaughter in 6th grade, and I don't want this to be her story someday. As Michael drove home through the quiet streets, the folder's images replayed in his mind. This wasn't just about one bad decision from a teacher. It was a system that had been warned and had chosen to look away. They knew, he said aloud, the words filling the cab of the truck, and they let it happen. Major Danielle Whitmore stepped out of the black sedan in full dress uniform, the kind that made strangers pause mid-step. The rows of ribbons and polished brass caught the late afternoon sun, but it was her posture, shoulders square, chin lifted, that spoke most clearly. 20 years in the Army had taught her how to walk into any room like she belonged there, whether it was a field tent in Kandahar or a principal's office in rural Ohio. The school's parking lot was half empty, the last buses having pulled away. A breeze carried the smell of fresh-cut grass and distant exhaust from the highway. Danielle glanced toward the brick facade of Maple Ridge Middle, noting the faded blue paint on the front doors, the peeling white trim around the windows. She took in every detail the way she would a briefing photo, cataloging the terrain before stepping into it. Inside, the halls were quieter than they had been when Leah was last here. A few students lingered by lockers, voices low. Teachers moved in and out of classrooms, carrying stacks of graded papers. Conversations dimmed as Danielle's boots struck the polished floor in measured cadence. The sound carried, and heads turned. Even without the uniform, she had a presence. With it, she was undeniable. She passed a bulletin board advertising the spring choir concert, a bake sale flyer curling at the edges. The ordinariness of it all only sharpened the memory of Michael's voice on the phone. Tight, controlled, but edged with a helplessness she had never heard from him before. The teacher's lounge door was half open. Inside, the smell of coffee and powdered creamer hung in the air. Laughter stuttered to a halt as she stepped through. 4 faculty members stood near the counter, mugs in hand, mid-conversation. Among them, Susan Hargrave froze, the color draining from her face. "Major Whitmore," Hargrave said after a beat, her voice a shade too bright. "I didn't realize you were back from deployment." "Clearly," Danielle replied, her tone cool enough to frost the air. She remained still, letting the silence press in. One by one, the other teachers found reasons to leave, slipping past her without meeting her gaze. When the door clicked shut behind the last of them, Danielle took one step closer. "We both know why I'm here." "I was enforcing school policy," Hargrave said, lifting her chin. "Perhaps if you were more present in your daughter's education—" "Don't," Danielle interrupted softly, but with a weight that stilled the room. "Don't make this about my absence. This is about your choices." Hargrave's eyes flickered. Danielle recognized that flicker. She'd seen it in young soldiers caught in a lie. "Fort Benning," Danielle said. 2 words, but they landed like a blow. Hargrave's lips parted, then closed again. 2014. Private Hargrave, discharged after failing basic qualifications 3 times. Filing false reports about your black peers. Do I need to go on? That was different, Hargrave muttered, but the certainty was gone from her voice. "It was the same," Danielle said evenly. "Blame others for your failings. Target those you resent. And now, 8 years later, you chose my daughter." For a moment, the only sound was the faint whir of the vending machine in the corner. Danielle let the quiet stretch before she added, "Stay away from Leah. If you so much as look at her again, you'll regret it." She turned and left, her boots striking the tile with the same measured cadence. Principal Robert Hale's office smelled faintly of aftershave and the lemon polish used on the large oak desk. He looked up from his computer as Danielle entered without knocking, his polite smile faltering. "Mrs. Whitmore?" "Major Whitmore," she corrected. She placed a thick manila folder on his desk. "Incident report, witness statements, medical documentation, and a copy of the harassment complaint Leah filed 2 weeks before this happened. Dismissed by you." Hale's eyes darted to the folder, then back to her. "We're conducting a thorough review." "A 1-day paid leave is not a review," Danielle said. "It's a vacation, and your review ignores the fact that you had prior warning and chose to do nothing." He exhaled, leaning back in his chair. "What is it you want, Major Whitmore?" "Termination of Susan Hargrave, a formal apology to Leah, implementation of anti-discrimination training, and compensation for the trauma you allowed." "Those are significant demands," he said cautiously. "You have 24 hours to decide," Danielle replied, her voice steady. "After that, this becomes public." She turned toward the door, pausing just long enough to add, "And you might want to be careful with your security footage policies. Destroying evidence tends to attract federal attention." As she left, Hale sat frozen, one hand resting on the unopened folder. Across town, the Channel 6 studio lights cast a warm glow on the set. A microphone was clipped to Hargrave's blouse, the producer murmuring last-minute instructions. She smoothed her hair and glanced at the camera, her expression carefully arranged into one of concern. 30 seconds, the anchor called. In her mind, Hargrave rehearsed the lines she and her lawyer had prepared, words that would paint her as the dedicated teacher under attack by an overbearing military parent. When the red light blinked on, she began. "Thank you for having me. I think it's important the public hears the truth." The Franklin County Courthouse had never felt so full. Rows of oak benches groaned under the weight of spectators, reporters, and local residents who had followed every twist of the Whitmore case. The air hummed with quiet anticipation, the kind that made people lean forward even before the judge entered. Leah sat in the front row between her parents, a colorful head wrap knotted neatly over her head. Danielle's hand rested gently over her daughter's, while Michael sat on Leah's other side, his broad frame still and solid, like an anchor in a shifting current. Judge Ellen Barnett, silver-haired and composed, stepped up to the bench. Her gavel tapped once. "Court is now in session." Her voice carried easily through the packed room. Grace Yamada rose from the prosecution's table, her dark suit crisp, her gaze steady. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, walking toward them without notes, "this case is not about a misunderstanding of policy. It is about the deliberate targeting of a 12-year-old child by an adult entrusted with her safety. It is about betrayal by a teacher, by an administrator, and by an institution that chose to protect itself instead of protecting her." Her voice was even, but the words landed like stones. She laid out the timeline: the ignored harassment complaint, the medical exemption forms signed by Principal Hale, the events of the day in question. "And you will see with your own eyes what happened in that nurse's office," she said, before returning to her seat. From the defense table, Lawrence Whitfield stood, buttoning his jacket. "Ms. Hargrave is a dedicated educator who found herself in a difficult position," he began. "She acted under the belief that she was enforcing school policy. What happened was unfortunate, but it was not criminal." His tone was measured, but the argument felt thinner than the space it occupied. On the third day of trial, the jury saw the footage. The large monitor flickered to life, showing grainy black-and-white images of the nurse's office. Leah, small in the chair, her hands gripping the armrests. Hargrave behind her, the clippers buzzing to life. Then came the audio, clear, undeniable. "This little princess needs to learn that her mother's rank doesn't make her special here. Time for a reality check." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. One juror covered her mouth, another's jaw tightened. Leah's head lowered, but Danielle squeezed her hand, grounding her in the moment. The video ran its 12 minutes, ending with Leah touching her newly shorn scalp, silent tears tracking down her cheeks. When the screen went dark, the silence in the room was thick enough to touch. When Leah took the stand, Judge Barnett had a privacy screen placed so she wouldn't have to look directly at Hargrave. Grace approached slowly. "Leah," she said gently, "can you tell us what Mrs. Hargrave said to you while this was happening?" Leah's voice was quiet but steady. "She said my mom thought she was better than everyone else because she was in the Army. She said I needed to learn that being black didn't make me special. She said my hair was ugly." "And how did that make you feel?" "Like there was something wrong with me for having the disease that makes my hair fall out," Leah said. "Like I wasn't supposed to exist." In the gallery, Chloe Bennett sat forward, her hands clenched in her lap. Danielle's eyes glistened, but she kept her expression steady for her daughter's sake. The defense tried to chip away at Dr. Sarah Mitchell's testimony, suggesting Leah's trauma was being exaggerated. Dr. Mitchell, calm and unflappable, replied with detailed records, panic attacks, hospital visits, the ongoing anxiety that kept Leah from walking into a school building without physical symptoms. "This was not simply a bad day," Dr. Mitchell said. "This was a targeted act against a child's most vulnerable point, delivered by someone she was taught to trust." It took the jury less than 3 hours to return. The forewoman, a middle-aged African-American teacher from a neighboring district, stood with the verdict form. "On the charge of assault against a minor, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of child endangerment, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of civil rights violations, under color of authority, we find the defendant guilty." The gavel came down, but the sound was swallowed by the eruption in the gallery. Cheers, sobs, the rustle of people standing. Hargrave sat frozen, her face pale, her hands clenched in her lap. Judge Barnett raised her voice over the noise. "Order! Order in the court!" Leah leaned into her mother's side, a small, relieved breath escaping her. 2 weeks later, the sentencing brought the same crowded courtroom. Judge Barnett's words were uncompromising. You held a position of trust, and you used it to cause deliberate harm to a child. Your actions were premeditated, racially motivated, and designed to inflict maximum psychological damage. She sentenced Hargrave to 18 months in prison, 5 years probation, and restitution for Leah's medical and therapeutic care. Outside the courthouse, the early spring air felt different, lighter somehow. News cameras clustered near the steps. Danielle and Michael declined interviews, shielding Leah from the crowd. But as they reached the car, a voice from the press line called out, "What's next for your family?" Danielle looked back just long enough to answer, "We rebuild." The auditorium at the National Museum of African American History and Culture was filled with a quiet reverence. Rows of chairs faced a small stage where a podium stood beside a display case. Inside, under soft lighting, lay a worn sketchbook, open to a page with careful pencil letters. "You tried to erase me, but I redrew myself stronger." Leah Whitmore, now 14, stepped onto the stage. Her colorful head wrap was patterned with phoenixes, their wings stretching skyward. The audience, educators, parents, students, settled into a listening stillness. "When I was 12, Leah began, her voice steady, "a teacher used her power to try to break me. She thought that by taking my hair, she could take my dignity, my confidence, my voice. But she didn't understand that strength isn't something you can cut away. It comes from knowing who you are and refusing to let anyone take that from you." Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of someone who had lived through the kind of lesson no child should have to learn. In the months after the trial, the Whitmores had turned their attention from the courtroom to the community. With the settlement from the lawsuit, they founded the Whitmore Foundation for Educational Justice. Its mission was clear: to provide legal aid, counseling, and advocacy for children who face discrimination in schools. Danielle took a leave from the Army to oversee the Foundation's outreach programs. Michael coordinated partnerships with veteran organizations, connecting families who understood what it meant to trust others with your children while serving overseas. Leah, still balancing school and her recovery, poured herself into art. Her paintings depicting resilience, justice, and transformation began to appear in galleries. Their sales funding therapy programs for kids. One of the most successful initiatives was the Voices program, an art therapy curriculum piloted in Maple Ridge and soon adopted by schools across the state. In brightly lit classrooms, children painted, drew, and sculpted their experiences, finding ways to tell their stories when words felt too heavy. Back at the museum, Leah continued, "I still have alopecia. My hair still falls out sometimes. But when I look in the mirror, I don't see something broken. I see a survivor who turned her pain into purpose. And I want every kid who feels different to know, your difference is your strength." In the front row, Danielle and Michael watched with quiet pride. Around them sat children from Title I schools in D.C., some leaning forward as if catching every syllable. After Leah stepped down, a small girl with cochlear implants approached her shyly. "Miss Leah," she said, "my teacher gets mad when I don't hear her. What should I do?" Leah knelt to the girl's level. "First, know that you're not the problem. The system that doesn't help you hear is the problem. Second, tell a trusted adult. And third, remember, being different isn't something to hide, it's something to celebrate." She pulled a small sketchbook from her bag and handed it over. "Draw your story, share it. Your voice matters." Years later, Leah would look back on that day at the museum as the moment she truly stepped into the role of advocate. From there, invitations came from schools, conferences, and even Congress. She testified before the Senate in support of the Leah Whitmore Protection Act, a bill mandating stronger safeguards against discrimination in schools. The bill passed with bipartisan support. At home, life regained its rhythms. Family dinners, weekend hikes, evenings spent in the living room with sketchbooks open and pencils scattered on the coffee table. But the undercurrent of purpose never faded. One evening, as the sun set over the quiet street, Michael asked her, "Do you ever wish we'd just taken the settlement and walked away?" Leah thought for a long moment. Sometimes I wish it had been easier, but then I think about the kids we've helped, and I know easy isn't the same as right. 5 years after the trial, Leah stood on the stage at her high school graduation, valedictorian of her class. Her speech was titled, "The Armor of Self-Worth." When I was 12, someone tried to take my armor. They took my hair, but they thought they were taking my dignity. They took my sense of safety, but they thought they were taking my voice. What they didn't know is that true armor isn't on the outside. It's built inside, piece by piece, through the love of those who see your worth and the knowledge that your voice matters. She removed her cap, revealing her natural hair, grown in uneven but beautiful waves. "This is who I am," she said simply, "and I'm proud of every part of my journey." In the audience, the students from the Voices program held up a large canvas they had painted together. A phoenix rising from flames, surrounded by children of all backgrounds, all reaching toward the sky. Leah's smile was wide and sure. "I will always fight for kids like us," she told them later. "That's not just my job, it's my calling. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the doorway to your purpose. Sometimes the people who try to break you end up showing you how unbreakable you are." Leah's story had begun with humiliation in a nurse's office, but it had grown into a movement that reached far beyond her own life. And as she stepped down from the graduation stage into the arms of her parents, the message was clear. Justice had not only been served, it had taken root, and it would keep growing. Sometimes the memory that stays with you isn't the loudest moment, but the quiet one afterward, when the applause fades, the stage lights dim, and a young woman steps down into the embrace of her family. Watching Leah's journey from a frightened child in a nurse's office to a confident graduate on that open stage, one could feel the arc of justice stretching across years, shaped by courage, patience, and the steady love of those who refused to let her stand alone. It wasn't a battle won in a single day. It was a tapestry woven from countless small acts of resolve, the kind the Black community has carried forward for generations. At its heart, this story is about dignity, the kind that doesn't shout but stands firm. It reminds us that defending the truth is not only about reclaiming what was taken, but about building something stronger from the pieces. Leah's family met cruelty with clarity, answered injustice with integrity, and in doing so showed that real victory is measured not by silencing an enemy, but by lifting others. For many in the Black community, this is a truth already known, that sometimes the most powerful answer to prejudice is to live fully and visibly in the light it tries to hide. In life, we will all meet moments that test us, moments when we're tempted to step aside because the fight is too hard or the odds too long. But as Leah proved, and as the Black community has shown time and again, there is a quiet strength in refusing to be diminished. It's the same strength you see in a neighbor who brings soup to a grieving family, in a friend who shows up when everyone else has gone home, in a stranger's smile that says, "I see you and you matter." These are the gestures that, like a lamp in the window on a dark night, guide us safely home. So perhaps take a moment as the story's echoes settle to reflect on where you've seen that kind of light in your own life. Maybe it was a teacher who believed in you, a family member who wouldn't let you give up, or a community that closed ranks around you when the world felt unkind. Hold those memories close. They are proof that even in a fractured world, there are still bonds strong enough to mend what's been broken. If this story has touched your heart, consider passing it along to someone who may need its warmth. We never truly know who is carrying a burden they haven't spoken aloud, or who is searching for a reason to hope again. And sometimes, sharing a story like this is more than just telling. It's adding another thread to the fabric that keeps us connected, reminding us that justice, like love, is strongest when it is shared.